Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live stream and Q&A. Hopefully you all are having a great evening or day, depending on where you are watching from. Make sure you hit that like button. Helps us out so much with the channel. Subscribe for more content like this if you are new and just finding our live stream for the first time. We do this every single week. You can join us every week to discuss all the latest in Star Wars news. And if it's not a very news heavy week, kind of like this week, then we do more of an open live Q&A format. So this is going to be completely open to all of you. Send in your questions, send in your comments, anything you want to talk about. See, we have a lot of great questions and comments already in the chat, some about Star Wars, some not about Star Wars. Send us in anything you want. We'll definitely talk about any topic you guys wish. So if you want it to be Star Wars or non-Star Wars related, let us know. Send it into the chat. We do have a couple news stories to run down. A couple of them are from last week that we never got to because it was a busier week. We did reviews last week for Outlaws, and then we also did a review of Lego Star Wars, the new little 4-episode mini show. So check those out if you haven't. We'll also be reposting in the next couple days sometime, probably tomorrow or Thursday, an edited version of the Outlaws review. So you can check that out if you haven't. But yeah, join us every single week here. And as we wait for people to trickle into the chat, make sure you're sending in your questions, your comments, your theories, and hitting that like button. We have more people watching than have hit the like button. So it always helps us out a lot when you hit the like button. All right, so let's start off with our first news story. And again, as people continue to trickle into the stream here, you can send in any comments about Star Wars, not Star Wars, or anything about the topics here. We will answer your comments about the topics specifically as we go through the topics if we're starting on the topics. And the first one we need to start on, so we missed it last week. It was part of the news last week, but we didn't get to it. We didn't have enough time. And I think it's kind of the most notable thing that's happened in the last 8 days or so in the world of Star Wars news. And that's that Star Wars Jedi 3, which we don't know the working title yet, but Jedi 3, the game series from Respawn and EA that we all love, Jedi Fallen Order, Jedi Survivor, will be the final chapter of this current story around Cal Kestis. Now, I don't really think this is too much of a surprise. A lot of Star Wars deals in trilogies. And I think when you have, obviously, modern gaming, it takes a long time to build these games. Even for a sequel, it took 4 years to get a follow-up to Fallen Order. And Fallen Order, they had initially built it. So let's say on at best case scenario, 2027 for Jedi 3, it's not too surprising that this would be the last project for this character, for this series of games. Now, what I think they would do is continue the Jedi series because it's a pretty broad-based Star Wars title. They can continue it with new Jedi or Jedi we're familiar with. Maybe take some characters from Star Wars throughout the Clone Wars or throughout the prequels and bring them in, make a game about them. It could be a standalone game. It could be another series of games. I don't think this style of Star Wars game is going to end, but I like that there is a conclusion for Cal Kestis' story here. And hopefully, if he doesn't die, hopefully we get more of him in the future in live action. But Sanak, what were your thoughts here upon seeing that Respawn have confirmed that Jedi 3 is going to be the final chapter of Cal Kestis' saga and these games?
Well, for a while there, it was almost impossible to believe that EA would commit to just like a single player game. And now we're here in 2024 talking about the third and final one about a pretty beloved character, right? So it's honestly still a miracle that we're at this point. But I'm pretty happy that they're not like trying to stretch it out too much. You know, as much as I really do enjoy Jedi Survivor as a game, I do think sometimes the story portions were lacking in comparison to Fallen Order, especially around the High Republic elements, which could have taken up more of the game. You definitely also have to point out, and like we pointed out in our review and our playthroughs, that the third act turn that kind of happens with one of the characters. I don't want to say it still, even though it's been a year since, but that one, that choice to be made was solid. I just don't think that it was, fully earned over its pretty short runtime, and then some things that are going on with Cal and some of the darkness that he's facing. So I'm happy that it's ending with a third game, right? I think this is a good way for him to be finished as a character if they really wanted to just be, here's Cal Kestis. This is the complete story of this Jedi who, he did so much, but maybe doesn't get his recognition because he's on Tanalorr, he's in parts of the galaxy, he's there in the dark times, and that I think that'd be fine. That being said, it is Cameron Monaghan. I do like his acting. That is a mocap of him, and it's pretty detailed, especially with the customization in Jedi Survivor. And I'm a big fan of Marin as a character. I was hoping that she'd be a little bit playable at some portions of Survivor. She wasn't, so I'm hoping that maybe she is this third game. And I would like to see them appear in live action. I don't know if it's necessarily something that makes sense right now in the Mandoverse period, to like kind of throw in all these Jedi. Maybe it's something where you can like hold them off with Tanalorr. You can kind of do I think I don't remember if it's Children of the Jedi or Planet of Twilight, where it is kind of like a sequestered Jedi planet. Maybe you can do something sort of like that with Tanalorr, where you keep them away. Obviously, you have the maze and everything, and after the conflict is over, right after the Thrawn conflict is over, then you have like more of an opportunity for Cal to like really stretch his legs, for Marin to kind of come in and be an interesting Force user perspective and change how we look at Night Sisters, especially after the grandmothers of Ahsoka and the role that they're gonna play. But I'm open to either. Honestly, I'm not one way or another at this point. I'm pretty happy if the story is kept to video games, because video games these days are just so detailed and rich, and there is so much more you can do with that character when you're in control of it. Kind of bringing any character to a different medium, just like we've seen with Ahsoka, to from the Clone Wars to Rebels to now with live action. It is a challenge sometimes, right? And I know people have criticisms of Ahsoka as a character. I felt like a lot of them were at least, warranted until we got that kind of spiritual journey that she undergoes in the Ahsoka season, which was one of the highlights for me. But I don't know what you'd expect from Cal, because he's not necessarily someone who has hours and hours and hours of story in that same way. Like, would he be a almost like a fresh reset as a character? Is he conceivably one of the best characters where you could say, like, yeah, you're missing 10 years of his life, but he can still kind of stay the same way that Ezra has been with his return to Ahsoka? I don't know, but I think he would be a decent candidate. But if they want to keep him, finish his story off, kill him off, I think it'd be a bold choice, and I think it would work pretty well.
Yeah, I think it would too. I think the way these games are set up, you're supposed to have a post game, so in that inherently there's a lot that you have to work around if you kill a character off, and usually that just means you start before the last mission. So you can still play post game as Cal. It would be bittersweet because he dies, but they could do that. So from a gameplay standpoint, I don't really see any reason why they couldn't kill him off. I love the idea of at least his story ending, not necessarily them killing him off, but at least a true ending to his story in video games. This is a character that, because video games are so popular nowadays and Jedi is well received, he has kind of transcended. I would say he's the first Star Wars video game character since Starkiller to really
Yeah.
transcend the video game medium and be popular outside of just video games. People are at least aware of him or know who he is, even if you haven't played the games. So I think by that very nature, with Disney's more interconnected storytelling into live action, you wouldn't have necessarily ever expected to see Star Killer in live action back in 2008. But now you can kind of expect to see, especially a character who was mocapped by an actor, like a true actor, not just a mocap actor. You could see them in live action. So I think it's interesting, and I think a lot of the direction will be dictated, obviously, corporately by Lucasfilm, whether they have designs for this character in the future. But I also don't necessarily see EA killing off their flagship Star Wars character. They haven't been
Yeah.
able to make anybody else in their Star Wars games really stick. If they were to do a spin-off, like you mentioned, with getting to play as Marin, I was hoping she would be playable in the last game too, and I'm still really hoping for that Arkham City, Arkham Knight style gameplay. in Jedi 3, where you get to be able to switch, at least during combat sequences, you can switch between Cal and Marin. And then, once the combat's over, you go back to running around and climbing things as Cal. I'd love to see that. But if they didn't do that and they wanted to do a Marin spinoff, they could do that and still have Cal involved in the story. I'm thinking, Jedi Knight, the last game to be titled with Jedi, the Jedi Knight Dark Forces series had 3 games about Kyle. And then the 4th game, Kyle's in it as a mentor, but he's not the main character. You switch to a different character. And I kind of see that this series going that direction. I would love them to experiment with other Jedi, like I mentioned earlier before we kind of got into the topic. I love them to go back to the Clone Wars and do like a Jedi Mace Windu game, a Jedi Yarael Poof game, a Jedi Plo Koon game. Do all that we've seen them attempt in like comics and stuff, and actually nail it in video games. That would be really cool. But in a lot of ways, those stories are more limited because we know so much about these characters. So if they want to continue to keep pushing and telling stories in the canon that actually matter to the medium, then they got to make Jedi 3 have some weight. It can't just, end and nothing really goes wrong for the characters. This is a series that has had weight amongst the games. People have died, major characters have died. And I'm glad that they, at least for their own little pocket universe, attempt to tell compelling stories by giving us stakes. And I think using new characters always adds to that stakes. But I'm interested to see where they go in the future, because there's no way there's no way this series is dying. Even if Respawn doesn't continue it, EA will find another developer to continue to push these games out and this series out, because it's too valuable of an IP to just let go. And I don't think Lucasfilm Games would want that IP to be let go either. They're definitely going to want to continue these Jedi games. So hopefully we see Cal more in the future. Skywalker's Academy says, I hope Cal comes into live action. And I do. I hope so at some point. Like, I'd love to see some version of him, even if it's not New Republic era. I'd love to just see Cameron Monaghan get to play him in some form, whether it's a Dark Times or New Republic era, or Rebellion era. But I would love to see that at some point. Then we also have Anthony Tiff, who says, I wonder if we see Ahsoka or Kanan in Jedi 3. Those are interesting choices. I think Kanan, the only possibility for Kanan would be if the game takes place still in Dark Times, and it's some mission that we didn't see in Rebels, whether before Rebels starts or sometime during Rebels that we didn't see. Ahsoka, I think, is a strong possibility always, because she seems to be everywhere and doing everything, connected to every little plot point. So that's obviously a much stronger possibility, I think, than Kanan. What do you think about those two characters, Senek?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily wanna go for Kanan unless it's set during Rebels. I think as for how relatively cheesy season 1 is in Rebels, that, premiere episode really emphasizing, like, "I'm gonna do the thing," and, like, he puts together his lightsaber and reveals himself, I think is a significant moment, so I wouldn't wanna have him be like, "Oh, I'm doing Jedi stuff, but I'm getting away with it because I'm not using my lightsaber." Like, that's kinda what A New Dawn already was sorta doing because he was trying to help out Hera. So I think I'm kind of fine with his story not really kicking to a different gear until he meets Hera, until he realizes there is a reason to fight, there is causes to fight for, even a former Padawan like himself can find his place again like that. So I'm gonna say no to Kanan. I think Ahsoka is always a great fit. She's definitely someone who can pick up pieces of, like, other stories, like, I think the one thing that I was really emphasizing I wanted to see, especially after Obi-Wan season, came out, was I wanted to see Reva. I wanted to see if she's gonna be left alive, let's pick up her story. I thought video games would have been a perfect way for Moses to not really deal with, like, the fandom that comes with TV and live action, but, like, the video games where you can just mocap and kind of stay disconnected in a lot of ways, and I think that would have been given her a little bit more range and flexibility for her character, and I think what we've seen of Ahsoka with the Clone Wars kind of filling in the gaps for Anakin's character, for Obi-Wan's relationships with Anakin, that little trio together, and now we're seeing how they got their continuation, and Ahsoka got their continuation. I wouldn't mind Ahsoka, like, picking up threads in between for Obi-Wan that are, like, not something he can necessarily dive too heavily into, because at this point, I do expect him to stay on Tatooine. I don't really expect him to have any major missions. If it is anything, I'd hope it's more like Tales of on Tatooine, where he is becoming that mythical figure, that one that scares off the Sand People, the one that is training and learning to transcend his, mortal flesh, right, under Qui-Gon's training. So if Ahsoka is around and she can find Riva or, like, she runs into it, I think that'd be, like, a great way to just continue threads because 'cause we've already seen Solo kinda be continued with the comics, a little bit here with Outlaws for sure. We're seeing a lot of in a couple weeks practically, a lot of the early 2015 canon be really streamlined as into one singular narrative with the Battle of Jakku Maxi series coming out. I figure if you're gonna do something like that, if that's where Star Wars in recent years has been really strong at, you could do the same thing with Ahsoka, kind of if you wanna have her have a significant adventure, without being tied into being with the rebels like Kanan and Ezra, without, having her upcoming story with Ahsoka season 2, like, weighing too much on what she can do. This is, like, a great way to explore, more of her encounters with Inquisitors and especially one that is not technically an inquisitor anymore, so I would prefer something like that. Uh, I just wanna see story threads that are kinda left out there in general for Star Wars be picked up in spin-offs and different mediums. I think that's where this franchise has almost always thrived at.
No, definitely, and I think Ahsoka is the type of character that does actually fit this story. Like, we got so bogged down in Force Unleashed 2 and even 1, but especially 2 of connecting Dagobah and Yoda and all these things. I don't necessarily want to see any of that in Jedi. Like, I like that this is its own little universe with its own survivors of Order 66. I don't need to see Yoda and Obi-Wan. But I think Ahsoka is the one type of character who does seem to transcend and cross over every single time to all these different stories. And she's like kind of a medium between everyone, every little faction of Jedi, whether it's Skywalkers or the the random survivors that are still out there, whether it be Ghost Crew or Cal possibly, or the Path. A Quinlan Voss would be another one I would really like to see. I've always thought that it would be cool to see Riva and Quinlan together in some type of show. But Riva is a good pull because they need to redeem her in some way. I mean, I still don't really love that her character exists in the post Obi-Wan timeline. Like she really should have died, in my opinion. And until they give us a reason to not have her die, I'll feel that way. So I would like them to finally give us a reason that she lived on, and so we don't have just like this hanging kind of plot hole that's sitting there and really shouldn't be there. So give us a good story about her. I wouldn't mind if she showed back up. Uh, Anthony also says, "Hope Cal doesn't die." Like we mentioned earlier, yeah, I could see it both ways. I think there's pros for both ways. Him living, the pro is we get to see more of him. The him dying, I think the pro is that hey, we finally told some compelling, important stories in Star Wars video games post sale of Lucasfilm, and I think that's also equally important as seeing him in live action in the future. So we possibly could. And then Anthony also enjoys the idea of Riva being in Jedi 3. Well, thank you guys for those comments. Keep sending them in if you have more comments about the Jedi story. I think we're going to move on to the second story before we get back into your comments for most of the rest of the stream. So keep sending those in. And our second story, it also came out like the day after we did our stream last week. So it's a bit old news at this point, but we have a lot more information on Skeleton Crew and the pirates, including some new photos of Jude Law and the kids in the background, and also new photos of the pirates, which that is the one that I'm a lot more excited about. Uh, as a concept, right? I like these pirates. I like the idea of pirates. I liked Swamp Thing as the leader of the pirates, but I haven't really been that excited about Skeleton Crew until I saw the trailer, and I haven't been that excited about them being the main villains or one of the key villain forces in Skeleton Crew. It's just they were a fun part of Mandalorian. I didn't think they needed to come back. But now that we're seeing the depth of the alien creatures and all the things you can see in the stills, all the different costume designs, bringing them back from Cantina all the way to now, really utilizing a large variety of the Star Wars, mythos that's surrounding the underworld and the pirates. This is getting to be at least a lot more exciting for me as a concept that they're part of this show. Less so as the characters that we saw in Mandalorian, and more so that we're just going to see kind of that seedier side of the galaxy, a bit more expanded side of the galaxy that we don't necessarily get in some of the main story conflicts between New Republic and Empire. So what were your thoughts, Sonic, after seeing these pictures and hearing some of the things they had to say about Skeleton Crew coming out soon?
Yeah, I think my interest has been growing just like you. I think I was a little bit more excited for it because I always was kind of drawn into the tagline of like Goonies meets Stranger Things, and I love both. Stranger Things is one of my favorite shows of all time, so I was always excited. I'm not really expecting this to be a story that continues for seasons and seasons. There's an argument that you can make for Stranger Things when it was originally pitched. It was going to be, if it was a continuation, an anthology series of like strange things happening all around America in the 80s, different periods, whatever it may be, right? So this could be a classic example of them being like, okay, we have a story. We think it's going to work with these kids. We want to hit all those vibes. And then we might be done, right? And start using elements of the story, characters, locations, and other Mandoverse properties, and uh, matching the tone, I guess, for a little bit more serious or more action-packed, excitement to come out of the Metaverse. Because as fun as this show looks, I think there is a limit to what you can really do with kids. Having a fully led kid cast, I'm already a little worried about them with, like, how people are gonna respond to them if they're not, like, you know, the best actors possible and
Yeah.
all that and or stuff, right? I just want them to come out of this having fun and like a solid, fun story that is a reflection of the mythology of Star Wars, maybe like the burgeoning legend of Luke and Leia and Han, and how the underworld and everything is reacting and changing in a similar fashion to how Heir to the Empire and the whole Thrawn trilogy kind of showed how that was an uncertain period, right? So I'd love to see what this show can do. Um, you know, Getting a Shistavin in was great, having the Wolfman concept back, but actually fleshed out. It's gonna be so cool to see that. I can't wait to see what the animatronics are like, especially since this is reported to be, like, one of the most expensive Star Wars Disney Plus shows. I think this is even more than Acolyte with how heavy its alien creature is, and I think that makes more sense with it being more of an underworld story, more on the Outer Rim, or maybe even a new galaxy that we see in Star Wars, Ahsoka series, right? So I'm excited for that, and I think the pictures, at least one of them looks pretty good, right? Seeing the Wolfman, seeing Jaleel White. If he looks familiar, that is Urkel from Family Matters. So he's kind of got like a little bit of a Lobout like mod going on his head too, which I thought I liked. Again, one of the best things about the original trilogy is always the retrofuturism that it kind of took and then made a little bit more grimier and birthed it, and especially the underworld really runs away with and has quite a lot of fun with. And I think this is gonna be good. I think at least aesthetically, the show is gonna have a ton of fun, with just doing a hodgepodge of stuff. Like, I would not be surprised if this show is where we finally see canon versions of like tie uglies, X-wing uglies, like where they're just mashed together ship pieces. It just makes sense for a pirate, especially. So I think that we're going to see a lot of fun things that are definitely going to be new, inspired by other shows and other big, movies and stuff like that. But I think we're going to see like a lot of like the Star Wars original trilogy flavor and its evolution from that late '70s, early '80s style into a little bit more of that late '80s, early '90s fashion and the influence of those movies and those stories and characters. Pretty excited for that. I don't necessarily love the picture with Jude Law. It does feel kinda like you raided Lando's closet a bit, and it's very airbrushed. Um, and I hope that he is a character that, isn't specifically a Jedi. I know there was also that, like, rumor that came out, from Production Weekly, who have been a little hit or miss, in more recent years about, like, "Oh, there's a new Star Wars Pirates that's set after," and, if you're upset that Acolyte's been canceled, you're not happy seeing, like, a spin-off already for this show. If you're happy that was canceled, you're like, "Oh, yeah, let's just go in, like, a totally different direction, put your money there." But I think we're running a little too fast there. We don't really know what that could be. That could just be like an animated Tales of series. That could be something that is with these pirates, but has nothing to do with Jude Law's character. Like Jude Law could be done after this season, right? It could just be a fun little romp that he has. Maybe he learns some responsibility with the Force and purpose, but then he's like, I'm still gonna stick with my world, the underworld, the effect that I can have there instead of being a true Jedi and using all my abilities to maximum potential and also maximum danger. So yeah, I'm excited. I don't really have insane expectations for this. I also didn't for Andor until I went to Celebration and started seeing things. So I'm hoping to be pleasantly surprised, and nothing has really let me down since we've started really seeing official stuff.
Yeah, and I think the more and more we see official stuff, the more impressed I am with just the presentation of this whole thing, the production design, the production value, especially coming off of Acolyte, which I think even the biggest Acolyte fans, I think, can mostly agree that the show didn't look like it cost $180 million. It looked far cheaper than that. They didn't use the best, they didn't use the resources to the best of their ability to get the production design and the costuming and all of that type of stuff really nailed down. Um, I love seeing all these creatures. I love seeing the Shistanabinans and like all of that stuff. Like it's perfect for this type of vibe and this type of show. I think it really fits, and seeing that start to come into the New Republic era, which started as a bounty hunter led show, with the Mandalorians, started as a bounty hunter era, and we've very much so moved far away from that tone and that feel. So I'm glad something's picking that back up. I'm glad we're getting back into the underworld. Give us Hondo and Melch. I want Melch in live action. Let's see Melch. But yeah, I want to see more stuff into this underworld. Go to Batu, do some other things that really connect the underworld elements of the New Republic era, the very few we have so far, bridge them, help build them out. And I think it does make sense, even though you said it's a rumor, right? I do think it makes sense that this pirate show could possibly happen or already be into production. I mean, one, anytime you do greenlight a spinoff of something before it's come out, it's a huge show of confidence, which is great for us, looking forward to the show. It means that they think people are really going to love this if that was actually a true rumor. The other thing, too, is it makes sense that right now, as we talked about in the past, a few weeks ago, with the Mandalorian and Grogu, they're recentering everything they're doing in Star Wars production from top to bottom, from film to TV, all around this New Republic era, all around this Mandalorian timeline. So if they're going to push Star Wars TV into that New Republic only direction, which would be a shame, even though I didn't like the Acolytes. It would be a shame to not go back and do other TV shows in other eras, once Andor ends, because Andor's done. Then we don't know what's next besides Ahsoka, and then possibly a Skeleton Crew season 2 or a Boba Fett season 2 or a pirate show. Those are all New Republic era shows. And so while I would like them to branch out and do more things, it does make sense for the model they're coming up with currently about focusing and centering around a story. And even though I want to see them do more things, I also don't hate the idea of hyper focusing on one era, making sure they get it right, rather than spreading themselves too thin across a bunch of different eras. So we'll see. I think it looks really, really good so far from the production stills. The Jude Law one is whatever. I don't really have any problems with it. I do like that he has like a pirate style, pistol that you would see in something like Pirates of the Caribbean, a Star Wars version of that. That's going to be interesting. I mean, hopefully it has some Star Warsy element to it besides just looking straight out of Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
But it looks all right. And I think his character, obviously, Star Wars loves to do the bait and switch. They've shown that he's a Jedi in the trailer, or they say you're a Jedi, and then he smiles. There's no there's no way he ends up just being some, typical ordinary Jedi who's a, happy-go-lucky and just living his life out in the galaxy. He's going to be doing a lot of things that subvert your expectations. So I'm looking forward to the show overall. I mean, every time we see something, it gets me more and more excited. I don't know. Excuse me. I don't know if that's just because my anticipation level was, very low when they announced it. And then coming off the Acolyte even lower because of really not liking that show. And now they're just slowly and slowly getting me more excited as we creep closer to December and finally get to see this show, or if it's just because everything does frankly look quite good. It looks different, and I'm excited for different. It could be a big flop, and I think that's the other thing with this too is I had so many expectations and so many things riding on my excitement and hype for the Acolyte. I don't really care for about this one. I think that's healthy for a lot of us. I said that in the past with Andor. I don't think anybody really had expectations. I was very excited for Andor. It was probably my third most anticipated out of all the shows they announced in 2020 because of the creative team behind it and because how much I like Rogue One. But we didn't really have any expectations on what that show was going to be or what it was going to be like. And I think tonally and visually, this show is starting to exceed my low expectations. Because if this is a flop, oh well, they tried, whatever. It's a little new corner of the universe we can just forget about. And if it's great, awesome. We have a new cool piece of Star Wars in this New Republic era. So yeah, those are our thoughts on Skeleton Crew. Let us know what you guys think of the images in the chat, and let us know what you guys think of the show overall. Are you guys excited for Skeleton Crew, or have you been kind of tempered expectations, but slowly getting more excited? Or are you just like, I'm done with all things Star Wars at this point? I don't think you'd be watching the stream if you were. But let us know your guys' thoughts in the chat. And now we're going to get to your guys' questions. We still have a couple topics that we could go over here in a few minutes, but we've gone for about 30 minutes on the main topics, and we want to get to your guys' chats. So for those of you who have just joined us since the beginning, this is a news show, but it's also mostly led by your guys' questions. So send in anything you would like to ask us or any comments you would like to make about anything you want into the chat, and we will go through them first come, first serve from the top to the bottom. And if you want to make sure you get a chat on the show tonight, send in a super chat. We go about an hour and a half, and we will work from the top. We are kind of long-winded, so if we don't get to the bottom, unfortunately, that'll just be how it has to be. But if you send in a super chat, we will make sure we get to yours immediately after sending it in. So we appreciate your guys' support. And also check out our membership. We have a lot of members in the chat tonight. We greatly appreciate all of them. So check out our membership programs. We have a lot of cool stuff over there. Okay, let's go into the top. One of our members, Skywalker's Academy, says, we aren't getting any more info about Rey's movie until we get her backstory. After that, I think they'll just reveal its filming. Yeah, and that's kind of in reference to the third story we'd put in the title here, which is just that Daisy Ridley's been talking about her Rey movie more. As she gets to every time she does any press, people ask her about it. And I think it is fair to ask about it, right? Because it was supposed to come out in 2026 and they still haven't started shooting. We still don't know what's going on with the script. They've done so many rewrites. Nobody knows what's going on. And so I think it's fair to have questions for her, but she's also just going to keep giving the canned responses that she's going to give, as anyone would give when they're being asked about a project that's currently in development. And basically she's just saying, I think it's a story worth telling. I wouldn't come back if there wasn't a story to tell. It's
Yeah.
going to be great, hyping up her movie. Um, but I agree with you, Skywalker's Academy, that I don't think we're getting any more info on the movie. But I don't necessarily agree that the movie's not going to come out until we get her full backstory. Because we've done a lot of backstory already in Shadow of the Sith, the book. And then I don't think they're really going to go into Rey on Jakku anytime soon, especially if we're working from beginning of New Republic era to the end. So I do think the movie will come out before we get like a full Rey origin story from the time she was dropped off on Jakku all the way to the Force Awakens. But I think this movie's not on 2026 anymore. I think we can all agree on that. And they know they have to get it right, so they're not going to reveal any information about it until they're very confident in a direction that they're going with this movie.
Yeah, a lot of similar feelings. I think it's just nice though that she has been in a lot more movies recently, a lot of like critically acclaimed indie films. That always kind of felt like the route that she would thrive in. She was like what 19, 20 when she got cast into The Force Awakens. It's been well over a decade now. And she stopped using social media for a bit. She came back, right? Like I think from what her comments are just a little bit like adjacent to all this new Jedi Order stuff, it seems like she handled herself pretty well. She's like, I knew I couldn't put myself into more situations that were negative or toxic for myself, right? I was already overwhelmed traveling the world and never traveled before. Now I'm meeting all these strange new people and interactions that, no kid imagines having, like, when they've never dreamed of becoming a Star Wars actor or actress, right? Like, it's just unfathomable, and even then, whatever ideas you have probably do not match the intensity and the craziness of that all, so, especially being, like, a female-led, hero for the Star Wars franchise, for this trilogy, and, she's made a big emphasis of saying, like, "Still, I don't really listen to a lot of that stuff online, people are gonna hate if they're gonna hate, I appreciate criticism, and I think my character's been received pretty positively otherwise," so, uh, I'm glad that, with this time off, now that she's married to her husband, working on films with him, she's showing up in critically acclaimed stuff, and she's gotten a little bit of a Disney backing with The Woman in the Sea as well. She's gonna have, like, a nice presence, I think. Even if you don't necessarily watch a movie of hers, I think you'll be able to hear, "Oh, Daisy Ridley did this. Oh, she did that." You'll hear some buzz for her until New Jedi Order, and I think that's the healthiest thing for her, to come back for this franchise when the story demands it, when, like, there's something really exciting to do with her character, and then have her go back to the little things that she likes to do and more the artistic creative filmmaking. I think that's, like, the ideal for a lot of actors when they don't have to necessarily be tied down by a franchise like the MCU, which is so linear and so demanding of, like, actors being back for a story and, stories crossing over and being connected and leading up to another Avengers film, another team up film. For her, she's had her, like, run, she's had a trilogy. Even in this film that's gonna come out, she might be one of the bigger players, but she's not necessarily being posited as, like, "Oh, this is, like, the next trilogy for her." She's kind of being put as, like, a supporting character in the master role, kinda dealing with the situations that Luke and Obi-Wan had, but younger, without as much presumably devastation in between, right? So it should be pretty fun and different for her character. I'm excited for Rey to just become a stronger character. Episode 9 was definitely the highlight of her acting. Not necessarily the story elements because it was all kind of shoved in there, being under 2.5 hours, but the bones are there for her to really have some really interesting stuff. And I feel like Daisy really fully realized that potential of that character in that final film, despite some of the issues that I have with the script. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I hope that Steven Knight and Lindelof's script, whatever revisions are happening, Charmin is able to work with that and then bring a creative vision that is very, focused on taking Star Wars to another step past the sequel trilogy. Because you do that well, even if Rey's not a huge character, but the movie is solid, you've now opened up a minimum of 15 years where so much post Episode 9 storytelling can go through. I'd love John Boyega, of course, to be in this film as well, but I don't know if he's necessarily gonna have as much of a serious role until, the success of the first one, so maybe a cameo or something, but if it does do well, if it is a great story, then we have all the roads opening up for both of those characters to have really interesting Jedi storyline. How different it could be, what the Stormtrooper rebellion that we started seeing in Episode 9 looks like for Finn. Does he kinda go for more of that militant Jedi, where Rey's a little bit more of, like, the wanderer Jedi? Are we gonna have an established order? What are we gonna see, about Luke's Jedi Order? Is this gonna be a great way for that film to come out and then do, like, an animated show with Mark Hamill to start fleshing out the gaps of his story? I don't know, but I'm excited regardless. Just take your time here, right? Like, Lucasfilm has focused so much on TV shows recently that this shift to movies after, kind of dropping the A Star Wars story, spin-offs and kind of making them into TV shows essentially with this Mandoverse. What does the movie franchise look like? What does that mean to be a movie in the Star Wars fandom that is its own new beast that isn't tied down to the Skywalker saga? And this will be a first real test of that. And I think they'll do a good job if they just take time and maybe don't talk so much about it, but that is the nature of Star Wars, right? I would prefer if things are a little bit more under wrap and we just find out a week before a trailer comes out, but that's not how it works these days.
Yeah, no, it is not. And I want this movie to really star Ray. Like they've advertised it as such, and I hope that the louder voices out there who really don't like Ray don't dissuade people from or the creatives from centering this movie about Ray because she isn't one of the best Star Wars protagonists and she could be. And that's why I would like this movie to be about Ray because same thing like I mentioned about Riva. Just because a character doesn't necessarily hit all the high notes in the original thing doesn't mean we can't make them better. I'm not for ditching integral pieces of Star Wars storytelling just because people don't like them. I'm for improving them, even if I don't like them, right? So I don't dislike Rey. I think her story works in some ways, doesn't work in other ways. I didn't really like the Palpatine connection. I still don't, but there's ways to make it better. And so I think this first movie, especially whether this is like a bridge film into a new trilogy that doesn't necessarily focus on Rey and Finn and Poe as much, and this is kind of a passing of a torch movie, or this is the start of something new, a series of movies, a duology, a trilogy, just a bunch of random stories told kind of like Bantam New Republic or esque. Uh, they could do that and make her a much better, stronger character, and that's what I'm rooting for because we don't want characters to be bad in Star Wars or mediocre. So many Star Wars characters have gotten so much extra material post their trilogies, and these sequel characters shouldn't be any different, even if right now they don't necessarily feel as compelling as the original six Star Wars movies main characters did when they came out. So moving back up to the top, or actually, we had a few more comments about this story down below. So we'll get to those. Starting with Anthony, who says, I'm glad they're pushing it out because they want it to be good. I was surprised that Ray was a Palpatine, but I like slash love the idea of one the first Jedi or the new Jedi Order being a Palpatine. And it could be really interesting. Like I just said, I don't like that she's a Palpatine really at all, but they can do things that make it compelling. And I am open to that. I'm not going to just be like blindly like, oh God, I hate that she's a Palpatine. So I'm going to hate this movie no matter what. If they find an interesting, compelling story reason, I'm excited that they're going to make me like that decision now. So I'm glad you enjoy it. And I really think it is the direction they should go is even though people don't necessarily like it, they really should go in the direction that she is a Palpatine carrying on the legacy of the Skywalkers. And how do they bridge that? And I think that's an important piece of her journey and what she's building in this movie. And they really got to nail that because, like it or not, this character is connected to the Skywalker saga and any story involving this character is going to be a continuation of the Skywalker saga, even if it's not episode 10. So they really got to nail that. They really got to make people fall in love with that, or they at least need to make people who don't like it at least appreciate the decision that was made and understand why it's important and rich for this character and not just something they added at the last minute to try to throw in a little extra twist, which is kind of what it is now, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's again 3 hours, man. That's all I was asking for in episode 9, especially if it is as JJ was claiming, a full culmination of all 3 trilogies. He was never the guy who was gonna really care about the prequels with some of his fairly negative comments about it. So, you know, I think that harmed even this twist too to some degree because I would have felt like loved to see a little bit more of like a House of Palpatine story kind of being established or implied to have happened with Dayton, and maybe there are other uh like maybe there are Palpatine clones who don't have the Force, and then there's like a dichotomy between them and the Strand cast that are designed specifically to be a blend of all these different Force users and their chemistry and makeup. I think that'd be a great way to also start really differentiating what's the difference between a Strand cast like a Snoke and just a regular clone that we've like kind of seen more obviously in the EU. But we don't have that right now. I still think there is a way to like make it work while still honoring Dayton's story and how it's kind of told to kind of almost make him like a breakaway, like accident, something that's kind of forgotten while all these politics are in play. I think that'd be a really compelling story to take place in the outer rim of sorts, the unknown regions where Snoke is kind of helping amass the First Order and navigate all the black hole clusters and the difficult terrain and everything. Um, but yeah, I I won't love it. I did like The Last Jedi being, like, a big push of like, this is Rey nobody, right? That this is someone who has just because of the will of the Force has come to be matched up with a Skywalker, and how much the Skywalkers, for better or worse, have been the most notable family and lineage with the Force in centuries, if not millennia. But I do like the idea of like the most evil person in Star Wars history being undone by his legacy and having that like come to defeat his mortal enemy. I think the bones are there despite the flaws. I think the bones are there in the sequel trilogy as it plays out. Now it's just the responsibility of auxiliary material like TV shows, like comics, like books, and whatever role it plays in this new Jedi Order film with Rey to make it worthwhile, right? And that's the only thing you can hope for, right? There's so many kids who grew up with Star Wars Episode 7, 8, 9 being their Star Wars. Now is the time to really, like, get them hyped up and make them remember some of the same things they were feeling when they were kids, and now they're kinda entering their teenage phase, right? I mean, it's the perfect time for them, right? It's like how when you grow up, you might love something like Pokemon. Then you come to, like, middle school and high school, you're like, nobody likes Pokemon," or you don't wanna play it again. Go to college, everyone's playing Pokemon again, right? This is the same way you should treat the sequels. You've given them a lot of time off. It's been 5 years since episode 9. Once this comes out, it'll be closer to 7 or 8, and I think that'll be a great time for people to be like, "Oh, man, I do remember really liking those films. Oh, man, Rey was, like, one of the first, like, female heroines that I was really gotten into in movies. Oh, I loved Finn. I want Finn to be that big player again," or, "I wanna see more, like, Rogue One-esque stories with Poe Dameron, and maybe we can get stuff like that paralleling him and his stories with Wedge Antilles and Rogue Squadron and the New Republic era or something, right? There's so much about the sequels that is a reflection, a parallel to not just EU, but the original trilogy and what's different, what changes, what legacy and mythology kind of clashes and churns together. And I hope whatever comes next really takes us past that point of like, let's keep it similar yet different at times, and then now really stretch your legs. So I'm always going to be excited for the future of Star Wars, and I think as long as they nail this first film and make it really fun, I think that's going to be more than satisfactory for me.
And then Skywalker's Academy follows up the question from the beginning and says that they don't need her full backstory, just enough to be compelling and good enough to help make her more than adequately trained, etc. Oh, so are you saying the backstory in between Rise of Skywalker and New Jedi Order, like the 15-year gap, or are you saying the um the backstory between like when she was put on Jakku and then found in Force Awakens? Yes. To which one? Sorry, I'm trying to figure out what you're saying. Because yeah, if you mean between Rise of Skywalker and New Jedi Order, then yeah, I'm with you there. Like I don't mind seeing some books and stuff touch that. I don't think we're gonna get the full explanation. I think a couple books, at least one type of bridge book. They usually do some type of prequel novel to these things. Most of them haven't been very good, but I wouldn't mind a book or a trilogy that really bridge that gap, if that's what you're meaning. But I think if you're just talking about the Force Awakens, the Shadows of the Sith to Force Awakens time period, that like 10 years, 12 years, I don't think we're going to see that any more than we have. We just are supposed to, understand that she's a scavenger, forced to survive on her own, and that's how she's learned how to fight and stuff. I don't think anybody like trains her in lightsaber combat or anything during that time. I think most of her story is kind of told. I think any little adventures we get with her in that time is pretty much going to be like Ray going on a little adventure where she helps her friends and saves the day, and you see how good of a person she is. I think that's kind of the gist of that period. But if you mean post Rise of Skywalker, yeah, I'm with you there then. And then also, Skywalker's Academy says that's another thing. Charmin needs to give fans a little boost on how she will make us happy with the show and not about her portfolio getting bigger. And I think they don't have a clear direction yet. Like I think she'll start promoting the movie more specifically when she knows what she's promoting. I think she signed on because obviously one, it's a opportunity of a lifetime, right? Direct Star Wars from some of the other things she's come from, in terms of not as high profile projects. So opportunity of a lifetime, of course she's going to say yes. And then right now they're still unclear exactly what it is they're working on. So I think she will start promoting it a bit more as we get closer to them actually going into production. But right now it's very nebulous what they're working on. And I don't think obviously she doesn't want to blow a big project too and give away some details or secrets about what's going on, even if they have certain ideas really solidified. So I think I don't really buy into or take really much credence into anything she says as of now, because right now she's working on a project that's still in pre-production.
Yeah, to kinda answer that first part, I do think it's gonna be that Rise of Skywalker and that New Jedi Order era that does get stuff fleshed out and connected. Of the time gaps that we do have, is probably the closest that we'll get to that episode 3, episode 4 time gap, where you don't necessarily need your characters to change drastically, and I don't expect her to change, like, to a huge degree like an Obi-Wan or a Vader or a Yoda does because it's not that traumatic of an experience for all of them, right? This should be something where even if there are conflicts, even if there are, like, little wars, like how EU always had some military conflict going on and all that, I don't expect it to be, like, insane. I don't expect it to be insane for Rey. I think what's gonna be more interesting always with this time period, it'll be that I don't think we'll ever get a proper New Republic again. I think the New Republic gets its run just like it did in the EU, all the way up to its literal New Jedi Order, and then it fell apart, and we had a Galactic Federation, a Galactic Alliance, right? I think we're gonna get the same sort of thing here at best, but I do expect to see like parts of the galaxy kind of carved out for different groups. I think the Mandalorians are gonna be a huge, huge player in this era. One, because the Mandoverse is huge, but also because the story that has been driven, has been built up for them is like that they are independent, that they are constantly being thrown into the fire, destroyed, and they've somehow got this young little Grogu who could be the leader one day, who could become the Mandalore, who is both a Jedi like a Yoda with incredible power, but has chosen to go with the Mandalorian path and the heritage of his father, Din Djarin, right? And I think that could be a big group, right? I could definitely see some EU groups like Hoppins and stuff like that start showing up. I just think in general we're not gonna have that unified government, and I think that's where the Jedi, without having that Senate supervision, without that control that I'm sure also affects Luke's decisions in the New Republic era, we just don't know it yet. It's gonna be compelling to see how almost like a rogue, like, Jedi group, right, that is kind of, like, unburdened by all these restrictions and dogma and bureaucracy functions, and we'll start seeing, I think, a little bit more of the emphasis that Episode 9 did on, like, ancient Jedi texts and training and excavations. This is a great way to have Rey still have connection with Luke and see what he, like, found on his scavenging, especially in the comics, especially with Lor San Tekka, and I think it'll be great. I think it's gonna be fun, and I think that's where we're gonna start seeing Rey get depth as a character and be reflecting on the prequel Jedi, on the Luke Skywalker Order Jedi. I'm sure we'll see another somehow Order 66 survivor, but be super old at this point, like, be around. I hope they kinda do a Vima Devoto situation where it's like, I guess there's just been thousands of years of this family that have somehow survived over the destructions of the Jedi. I hope to see finally some Jedi that have survived Luke's academy or away from the conflict of the sequels on purpose if we're gonna make Ahsoka work as well as we have so far. And, there are definitely creaks with her story by the time we come to Mandoverse, but I think Luke's Jedi who have survived, who aren't, you know, being necessarily hunted down the same way with a government saying, "Let's destroy and kill every Jedi, they're the enemy of the state." There is so much possibility for them to just have been in the fleet or something and just other civilians that are now gonna show up with Rey and might not wanna do a Jedi Order together, but will at least give her some advice, start doing their own things. You'll start seeing maybe Jedi factions, which I think will be really awesome for Rey to navigate through in comparison to what Luke does, right, when he's trying to reestablish an order. It'll be all fun that way. And then for your second one, yeah, like Liam said, we just have to wait. She's only really done documentaries and 2 episodes of Miss Marvel, and it's not like her episodes of Miss Marvel were bad, but she was given the worst scripts because they were changing the setting from New Jersey, and now we're gonna bring back a storyline that's set during Pakistan and the p the splitting of Pakistan and India together are in the late 40s, right? And conceptually, as a documentarian, as a historian herself, I think she nailed those elements, like the traumatic, very painful exodus and like lost family separations and all that stuff there. Did it make sense for, like, a 6-episode series or something? No. No, right? It deserved to have longer episodes, it deserved to have more emphasis on just the stuff that's happening with the Pakistani American in New Jersey, right, in Jersey City, and its villains were a little all over the place too, but I think that was a good first step for her, right? I think that was kinda her training ground. I'm not gonna ever say a filmmaker needs to take huge, huge steps and be very specific about how they make it to big movies, because a lot of the greatest directors in history, like a James Cameron and all that, didn't have a build-up period, right? James Cameron went from Piranha 2 to Terminator, right? And before that, he was, like, making concept art for movies, right? I think there's a reason they picked her because I think they can really tap into the voice and the direction they really want for Rey and the differences that they wanna create with her and her characters that will make her even more unique than some of the more regressive qualities of, like, tying her in all the way back into the Skywalker saga, into the Palpatines and all that. Like, this is a chance for Charmin to make Rey louder, more of a voice in the galaxy, and be different just outside the situation of the galaxy at this point. So until she gets a proper script, until everyone is satisfied and things are actually being filmed, I don't expect to hear anything serious that should be taken more than just like, "Hey, it's still coming out. It's just, it's a work in progress."
And we got a super chat from Toydarian Dan, so thank you so much, Toydarian Dan, also another member of ours, and we really appreciate that super chat. Says, "Hey guys, was hoping you'd hit 15 subs, 15K subs tonight, and we actually very much so might. I don't know what we're at right now. It says we're at 14.9, but if on our analytics we're, like four, three,
We are
four
4
away.
away.
So yeah, we might do that by the end of the stream. But it says keep up the great work, great content, great place for Star Wars. We really appreciate that. Thank you so much. That's all we really try to do is just make this a fun place for you all to talk Star Wars, and where we can give dissenting opinions on things, but enjoy discussion about why we disagree with each other or agree with each other. Fellow subs, keep spreading the word to get these guys to 20K. Yeah, that would be awesome. Everybody, if you enjoy these streams and you think you have a friend or know somebody or even just want to post it on social media, anything helps. Send out the word and let people know that you enjoy this and enjoy our content. And yeah, hopefully we continue to have even more amazing voices like all of you join us every single week to talk Star Wars and watch the rest of our other content and enjoy everything that we offer on the channel. So thank you so much again for that super chat. Scrolling back up to the top here, getting back to critical thinkers. Sorry, we got kind of far away from your your question here at the top. So hopefully you're still watching. It says, I've been interested in getting into the post Return of the Jedi canon timeline, Aftermath, Alphabet Squadron, and Bloodline, etc. Which novels would you recommend for best understanding this era in new canon? Well, for me, you listed some of the ones. My favorite Star Wars canon book still is Bloodline. I love that book, and if you like the sequels at all, I think that's one that definitely enhances Force Awakens quite a bit, especially Leia's side and the New Republic side, because so much of the New Republic storyline was just cut from Force Awakens in favor of putting it in the crawl. So yeah, I think that helps a lot with the politics of the time and also what's Leia doing? What's the difference between New Republic and Resistance and all that type of stuff that you kind of miss if you haven't seen the movie 20 times. And then the next one I would say that you didn't list is Shadow of the Sith. Shadow of the Sith is the Luke book. It's Luke and Lando, and it also does the whole Rey backstory. It gives us everything about Rey's parents that you see in The Rise of Skywalker, really connects all that stuff, gives us a lot of Exegol perspectives, connects to some other things like Anakin's in it for a brief moment. There's a lot of really cool stuff in Shadow of the Sith, so I think you should definitely check that out. That's probably my second favorite canon book. As for the two elephants in the room, right, Seneca or Alphabet Squadron and Aftermath. uh, because frankly, you've pretty much named everything that's in New Republic era. There's not too much else. There's like Phasma, there's the Galaxy's Edge books, but there's not really much else in that era. And so
Yeah.
when it comes to the era, Aftermath was supposed to be the big thing. It was big, and I like each book a little bit more. Actually, really like Empire's End. I don't like the first one really at all, but the second one I thought was fine. But I really like the last one. But they pretty much forgot about the series for 10 years, and now we're finally getting back to connecting to the Battle of Jakku and Aftermath. And so I think that might actually be it is the earliest out of all the ones you mentioned, all the New Republic stuff. I think that's where you start if you're looking to get into it, especially because it's connecting to comics nowadays. I have read Alphabet Squadron as well, and I think that's a really good Alexander Freed has a very specific style, and I would say give Alphabet Squadron 100 pages at least and see if you like it. He has a very specific style where it's like hyper military, hyper detailed, and especially with Alphabet Squadron, it is very much so focused on the psyche of these characters, these pilots, and how they form this ragtag group. And I think it's another trilogy that gets progressively better, where the last book is my favorite by a good margin over the other two. But it is not really too similar in the to anything else that you'll read in Star Wars canon besides maybe his other war book, the Battlefront tie-in book. But even that one is a bit more connected to the events of Star Wars. Alphabet Squadron is very much so its own kind of unique beast, and it loosely connects. I mean, it connects to Battle of Jakku, but it doesn't tell the story like Aftermath does. So I would say read that after you read Aftermath, but I would say Aftermath, then maybe Shadow of the Sith, then Bloodline. Check that trilogy out and those two books first, and then if you're still interested in the Battle of Jakku and early New Republic, you can check out Alphabet Squadron. But I think it is an acquired taste.
Yeah, there isn't really much other books, like, you can even argue that technically Bloodline is more like a Rise of the First Order era than, like, proper New Republic too, because
Yeah,
the whole premise of that story is that the New Republic is in gridlock, that
yeah,
nothing is happening, and that politically they are trying to, like, finally make the choices that Mon Mothma, Leia, and all these early politicians in the New Republic kind of decentralizing power in the New Republic and kind of giving way to like a lot of imperial converts. They're trying to like bring back power to like a chancellor like role called the first senator, and Leia is up for that, right? And it's not just politics, but I think this is probably the best politics book that we've probably ever had in Star Wars, with them like actively playing a role as opposed to like trying to pull strings from an economic perspective and like industry in the same way like Plagueis does in his novel.
yeah,
This is great stuff, right? This is the Leia, the politician that you always hear about in canon before she returns to become a general in the Resistance and lead that effort and fund it. This is one that we kind of see in the EU, but she's always just on adventures. So I don't really know how much time she has to actually politic other than the stuff in between Bantam and like New Jedi Order and stuff like that. Um, it's strange to me that both canon and Legends have been pretty adamant that Mon Mothma doesn't have too much time in this New Republic structure, and in EU, she died pretty quickly, like, just like a fairly peaceful death, though it's kind of implied that some of the poisoning in one of the books and all that, like, wore her down. Um, I don't know if they're saying she's retired, but she's the if they wanted to, they could have cast an older actress, and I don't know if the original actress is still around, but she could have showed up in the sequels or something in, like, a call or, like, one meeting or something with the Resistance, but nothing like that happened, not even in the Resistance show. So, it is more of a book that if you wanna just, like, get all the politics necessary for, the sequel trilogy, read that 100%. But there's also great adventure, great action there, Ransom Casterfo, I think that's his name.
hmm
Ransom is a fantastic character. I love Claudia Gray because she also like just a fan cast her characters that she kind of comes up with. So she went with Tom Hiddleston, who you guys all probably know from Loki, right? And that's, like, who she sees interact with Carrie Fisher and her Leia, right? So, if you imagine that and you play out his scenes, he is such a compelling character. He's someone I absolutely wanna see appear again, like, just in the same way that, her other character from Master and Apprentice, the second, or technically the first Count Dooku apprentice, Rail Averross, right? I wanna see what's up with him and if he manages to survive or something. But yeah, fantastic book. Shadow of the Sith for me is my number one, and that's mostly because I think it hit the psychology of the character of Luke really, really well. Doesn't answer every single Exegol question, but it actually raises more. And I can't say the Darth Vader line, which recently concluded, necessarily helps out in that sense because there is a little bit more questions about, like, why didn't Vader tell Luke until this book? And why is I don't wanna spoil it, but why Anakin is not like a typical Force ghost, which I think is really compelling. I think you could do some really cool Force stuff with that. But Lando is really good in here, and you get to deal with some of the consequences of his story and his backstory in Episode 9. Um, Honestly, this is probably one of the better Lando books ever. I know there's technically Last Shot with him and Han, from Justina Ireland, but I know a lot of people are pretty mixed on that book, despite loving Justina's work in the High Republic. Uh,
It's actually, Daniel Jose Older, I think,
Oh,
with
sorry,
the
Daniel Jose Older, yeah, and okay, that makes a little bit more sense for me because he's really good at, like, capturing, like, bombastic characters than he is, like, nuance to me,
yeah.
so, other than Trail of Shadows, which we both really liked until it was kind of forced to tie into, The Fallen Star, that was a pretty interesting book from Claudia Gray, but not one of her best. But yeah, other than those, it is really Aftermath, like Liam said. That is kind of what you have to lean on. There is a lot of stuff that happens in the second and third books, especially. The first one is a little bit more about setting up the stage for the end of the Empire. So if you've heard of the character Ray Sloan from A New Dawn, she becomes a huge character here. But honestly, I want to kind of use this as like a plug that we might do a tier list of like all the comic book runs before Battle Jakku, just kind of rank them and all that. And if you guys are interested, let us know in the comments because that is what the Battle of Jakku Maxi series is promising. This is going to be something that's released, I believe, at least bi-weekly, if not weekly, starting in October, all the way till the end of the year. That's going to be our transition from right after Battle of Endor, Return of the Jedi, into the 1 year gap that we've seen with Shattered Empire and some comics mostly, and obviously these Aftermath books. It's gonna be Luke, Leia, Han, Lando, all these like really important characters finally getting their story because a lot of all these books that are around this time period is with characters like Snap Wexley and all that. So we're gonna see characters that I think that are in those stories to make appearances and cameos, but we're gonna really see a very dark side heavy with Yuppie Tashu and all these things from Aftermath with Acolytes of Beyond already kind of implied. We're gonna see stuff that is tied to the sequels from this series. We're gonna see stuff that's gonna lead into Mandoverse. Um, it's gonna be 12 issues, and then it's probably the most anticipated run for Star Wars comics since arguably the start of 2020. So this is gonna be something I recommend you guys to follow along with us because I think that's something we might like pick up and read singles of just because it's gonna really tie in everything. Like one of the most impactful characters in the Aftermath trilogy is Gallius Rex, who's kind of like Palpatine's kid, a contingency plan for what he was going to do to the Empire, have it collapse in on itself in the Battle of Jakku. And we've never seen a picture of him. We still have no visual depiction of him. And this, after nearly 10 years, we might finally get it with this comic book series. We might finally get answers for the start of Ray Sloane's journey with the First Order and why she's gone and superseded by Snoke. It's gonna be really interesting, but yeah, we're definitely trying to maybe use this as a series to not only get back into the 10 years ago of Star Wars, the kickoff of the sequel trilogy, but a way to like kind of really reboot comics on this channel. So if you guys are interested in that, want to follow along with us, let us know.
Yeah, and I think it also depends, like, another thing with Aftermath too is you could even say it's not New Republic era yet, right? Because it's
Yeah,
kind of thing that starts New Republic is the Battle of Jakku. So it's kind of loosely the beginning of that era. So if you're just talking like post Return of the Jedi stuff, there's also Princess and the Scoundrel, which I think is a better depiction of Han and Leia's wedding than Courtship of Princess
courtship.
Leia. But I don't know. It has its weaknesses as well. I
Yeah,
think especially since it's tied heavily into the Galactic Star Cruiser hotel that they
yeah,
already discontinued. So now it has even less like kind of import. It's kind of this weird 3 act structure, but I would say the first act is really good and certainly worth reading just for the marriage. After that, I Courtship of Princess Leia might be a better book overall, but I think this is a better depiction of the wedding. But yeah, Alphabet is is certainly an acquired taste. Aftermath is worth, I think, the main. That's the heaviest in plot, I would say. But if you're, because Critical Thinker at the bottom says, I personally detest the sequel trilogy, but hopefully these novels are better. And I think if you're trying to make the sequel trilogy better, then easily Shadow of the Sith and Bloodline should be the two you're focusing on. If you're just looking for things that are in this time period to explore and you want to know kind of the entire lore around it. I mean, canon, similar to Legends, canon going in release order for canon is never a bad thing because the lore starts to build up from there. Because they started with nothing and went to what it is now. So uh, you can follow in released order and kind of get the evolution of the lore based on the releases of the sequels, starting to tie things into different releases. But if you're just looking for something to improve the sequels, I think Bloodline dramatically improves the political side of Force Awakens, and Shadow of the Sith dramatically improves a lot of the things that are just randomly there in The Rise of Skywalker. So there's nothing yet that really will fix The Last Jedi if you don't like it yet. But hopefully at least that gives you the Luke you were hoping for or expecting in Shadow of the Sith from The Last Jedi. And Critical Thinker also asks, what would you say are the most interesting contrasts between the time period of New Republic in canon and Legends? That's a really good question as well. And I think the number one thing, like we were kind of just saying, is important story. Where the Aftermath was supposed to be this important story that really had a big impact on the galaxy. It was connecting directly to Force Awakens. Really doesn't connect to anything about the story of the Force Awakens. It's more of a setting. It's more of the backdrop for the battle of Jakku. And then it was a series that, because it was mixed critically and people didn't really love it that much, they never went back to again after it ended. And then now they're just going back to it for the first time since 2017. So it I think canon overall, New Republic era, if you're talking just books and comics and stuff like that, it's an era that has yet to really be explored. And one of the things that I've tried to highlight too for people's optimism about bringing some things from Legends into canon and doing certain Legends style stories in canon is the fact that New Republic era in canon is a lot longer than it was in Legends. A New Republic era in canon, if you just want to say it's from right after Return of the Jedi all the way to The Force Awakens, that is 28 years. It's 32 BBY, I believe, is Force Awakens start, or is it 34? It's 30. Yeah, it's 30 years. 34 BBY, ABY. So it's 34 years to the Force, or 30 years to the Force Awakens from Return of the Jedi. 34 years from A New Hope to Force Awakens, and in the Legends continuity, it's about 22 years, 20 years, and you have New Jedi Order take over after that. So I think one of the things right now is it's a much bigger period and it's a far less explored period. So there's that. And so if it's going to kind of frustrate you to read all these stories that are frankly relatively disconnected from each other. There's a lot of singular one-off books, whereas the Bantam era, which mostly focused on New Republic, it was a lot of trilogies. It was a lot of disconnected trilogies, if you want to call it, like Callista trilogy. There weren't really any singular books. There were everything kind of built on each other. So if you want one cohesive, connective tissue all under the umbrella of publishing, that's not what you're going to get in New Republic canon. But it will have stories that focus a lot on the extraneous elements of characters. So again, that's another big difference. Outside of Bloodline, outside of Last Shot, and outside of Shadow of the Sith, there are no books really about Luke, Han, or Leia. This is not who you're really going to get. And sadly, there's really no books about any of the sequel characters. There's one little origin book for Poe, and that's it. There's a kid's book that has little short stories about Rafe and Poe. There's nothing really about them. So I think if you're looking to enhance the film characters, this era will not give it to you like Legends gave you the continuation of those characters' stories because there were no more movies coming. New Republic and canon is very much so holding back. But what you do get is a richer, more expansive focus on all sorts of different characters that unfortunately haven't been made important, but could be important if they wanted to bring them back. And an Alphabet Squadron, like Hera is a major character in Alphabet Squadron. So if you want connection to like the animated series and some of the other stuff, it has that. But yeah, it doesn't have the expansive world building that Legends did. And I think that's one of my favorite, or that's one of the most frustrating things about canon. And one of my favorite things about Legends is how much it really pushed the story forward. But they're obviously holding back because they had the sequel movies coming out, and now they don't know what they're doing with the New Republic timeline. Since there's a possibility of live action happening in this era, they're holding back and publishing, which to me is unfortunate. But if we get an awesome TV show that they recast Luke or something, and we get a great TV show, I won't mind that we didn't get a book. But yeah, those are the main differences you're going to see between New Republic canon and New Republic Legends.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit more to that, I think if you're looking at like the character of Luke, one of the funny things that Band does is that almost like not just the Callisto trilogy, but like Dark Empire and all that. For like the first 5 years after Return of the Jedi, he keeps on falling in love with everybody. It's just like it's kind of hilarious that in EU he's like unable to like stop falling in love with like all these different women, including technically like a ghost of a woman too, and that's probably like the most impactful romance he has until Mara, who we have this image of him. If you like, look back at EU, you're like, yeah, Mara's such an like important player and all that, but she's really like not with Luke for huge portions of her story after the Last Command. It takes her 10 years basically, with vision of the future and everything to like be like, okay, let's talk about everything that's happened. This periods of times where we're crisscrossed over here and there, right? Um, yeah, and then canon's kind of the opposite. We've almost seen a Luke that has, like, 0 attachments, and when we do have attachments, it's mostly with Ben and some of the struggles that he has being a master and being an uncle, right? Um, we both still want Amara Jade. Like, we want her. Like, it doesn't you I'd argue that that 10-year gap in how between The Last Command and Vision of the Future, it's the nature of the story kind of dragging on with Imperial Remnant a little too long versus where canon it's almost like a little too short, and now they're kind of rectifying like the choices that were made with the Aftermath trilogy of like imploding the Empire. They're like, okay, no, there's still people who have forces. It's just not going to be Palpatine led or inspired in the same way, which I can work that out in my head. Like that's fine. So there's differences, and I think if you bring Mara back, you can kind of condense that 10 years, remove that, and you have New Jedi Order, and then basically after that, it is Legacy of the Force, and as we know, she gets killed off there, and Zahn was not happy about it. He was not told about it. That probably was not the intended end that he had for that character, or was even supposed to end. She was basically a movie character equivalent at that point with how long she'd been around, especially with video games and everything else too. So I think you can still fit in a um, what is it? I think you can still fit in a Mara Jade story and impact on Luke and still have her be her own rich character in like more of a 15 to 20-year period instead of like the 30-ish that kind of happens in EU. Yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting how it goes. But I, we just don't know about these original trilogy characters for the most part. Like, well, Jan from Han is like, oh, he races swoops and stuff like that, right? Like that's what he does. He's like a manager for that. Leia's a politician. Luke is traveling the galaxy with Lord Santeca before he, really settles on expanding his academy and training students. That's all we know right now. It's the nature of like, are they going to recast, deep fake? Are we going to keep that story in animation or live action? Is that like blocked off too? And that is some of the downsides of Disney and right now what we've had under Filoni and Favreau kind of like controlling so much of like that first decade of the New Republic. But I think it'll change. I think this Battle Jakku comic series is a first real strong step to like, let's ground out the game between Endor and Jakku. Let's move forward from there.
And we got a super chat from Dangerous Damien. Thank you so much, Dangerous Damien for sending in your super chat. Really appreciate it. And kind of continuing along this theme of books, favorite new Jedi Order book. And that is a tough one, as many of you know, 19 books in New Jedi Order, if you're counting every single one, plus short stories and novellas. There are so many parts of New Jedi Order. And I think one of the great things about the series that, makes certain ones stand out is the fact that they continue to build on each other over and over again, and you get payoff. I mean, almost every book, right? You get the little duologies, and sometimes those can drag for me, especially when you get later into the series. But the answer you're kind of expecting, and I think most people say it's Traitor. I love Jason Solo, and I love what they do with him in New Jedi Order, and that book is incredibly exciting. And Matthew Stover's written some of my favorite Star Wars books ever, and I just love his writing style. I love Shatterpoint's one of my probably top 5 Star Wars books, and so yeah, Traitor certainly stands above the rest. But there's so many things I love about so many different ones. I love James Luceno, so Unifying Force also works quite well, even though it's a little long. And then even Vector Prime, like I like a lot of Vector Prime. I like the slow build. I won't spoil it in case people haven't read it. I like the slow build and suspense, and I really love the aftermath of the big, death. Um, it's heartbreaking. It really is, especially for these characters. So I love the way the characters that are put in that conflict are written. And it, as the start of the series, it's one of those that actually, like, I don't know how to describe it. It's not one of the best books in the series, but it really hooks you in that type of emotional weight for a character death that is a little, it's surprising, but it's also controversial. I think the aftermath of it, the way it weighs on the other characters, it hits very hard with the aftermath, if not, in the moment. So yeah, those are some of my favorites. What about you, Cynic?
Yeah, I'm a fan of Trader, but I think for me it is Unifying Force. I think honestly you could have ended the EU there. It was like a very brilliant ending in my mind. The concept of the Unifying Force, I don't love it 100%, but I think after the chaos and insanity of New Jedi Order, of the Vong invasion and everything, and like how their culture was transformed through the course of the war as well. I think it makes sense that at least for that time period, right? Like that is how Jedi would operate moving forward. Like you said, Jason after Trader onwards goes from like this like fun kid who likes animals and stuff like this, and increasingly is dragged into horrific situations with his sister, and then losing his little brother and all that. Right? It's like, oh man, like how is he going to change? And he kind of struggles until Trader, and Trader is arguably like the most devastating Star Wars book, especially with the context of it being mostly on Coruscant too. And at that point, Coruscant is still fairly new to prequel trilogy fans, and what we're seeing out of that. And you're trying to combine that with like the Imperial Center perspective that you get from the Rogue Squadron books and all that. And I think it is a really, really strong book because of what Stover does with his just detail work. Like he'll take a page where another author would be like, "Hey, they jumped out of hyperspace." He'll like describe it in detail, and that feels like a very like high fantasy writing style to me. And he has all those elements there. I mean, obviously, Revenge of the Sith is one of the best adaptations ever of a movie in book form, and this is just another great example of like what he could do with original stories too. So Verger, I don't love her as a character sometimes, but in this book, she really does work for me. I am quite a fan of that. It's just a shame that Legacy of the Force, which was kind of mostly led by Denning and Travis, right? They're not my favorite authors, and I think they do undo some of the weight of this trillions of people killed in the galaxy, right? Billions of Ong and all this and that. I do wish that the story that Lucina really lands had more weight. But the next thing we have is the Swarm War, and then it's Legacy of the Force, and practically everything kind of gets undone, which kind of always bothered me. I was hoping there'd be at least like 10 years, and it would at least justify a lot more of Jason's turn afterwards, because it is kind of random about why he just has to go dark when he has after Trader arguably one of the best perspectives on the Force, and he's just strange and weird. And I wish he stayed in that bubble instead of getting caught up in Corellian politics and manipulation, and then of all characters, Lumia being his reason to be trained as a Sith. So yeah, a unifying force for me, but Traitor is very close second.
Well, thanks for the question and thank you for the super chat. We really appreciate that. And moving back towards the top here, we still haven't gotten through too many of these questions. We're sorry, everybody. Um, we'll go a little bit longer, but we still can't do too much longer, but we'll continue to try to get through these. Critical Thinkers' next question was, given Legends still focuses on bureaucratic and political failings of the New Republic and the X-Wing and New Jedi Order books without needing to blow up the entire Republic because of Force Awakens. Yeah, and like we were saying earlier, I mean, I think if you're interested in the politics side, that you kind of get sprinkled throughout the entirety of early Bantam. Bloodline is that place, even though it is a political thriller, so you don't really have too many other things going on besides the politics. Uh, but yeah, it is the most akin to that side. I think that is another big difference, obviously, between canon and Legends, is you don't have they're not that well rounded, these books. They usually pick a certain direction, right?
Yeah.
It's a war story. Alphabet Squadron's a war story, and not necessarily in the vein of X-Wing. And I don't really like when people compare them at all, because X-Wing is completely different. Maybe Wraith Squadron stuff is a little closer to Alphabet Squadron, but the Rogue Squadron stuff is not close to Alphabet Squadron at all. Alphabet Squadron is not fun. It's not. It's depressing,
Intentionally so.
and it is very much so focused on the psyche of these characters. And there's a lot of backstabbing, and there's a lot of like dealing with the fact that the rebellion is made up of people who all hate the same thing but aren't necessarily aligned on the same thing. And I think philosophically, a lot of Alphabet Squadron is really interesting and works. And it's a very different side of Star Wars than you've seen on any other. Like, I've never really read any Star Wars books like Alphabet Squadron. Really, Alexander Fried has a very specific style of writing, and that's the only, he's the only one that does that. And I think his books are a little long, and it works in phases. For me, it'll have chapters where I'm really interested. Other times I'm starting to get a little bored and it's a little redundant. But he hyper analyzes his characters, and for if you're somebody like who's just fascinated by 400 pages of like interrogations and meetings and cross sections and backstabbing and all that stuff, that's right up your alley. But yeah, the New Republic and canon very much so picks a style, like a genre to go through, wherein Legends, they were more written like the original trilogy, where it had some politics, it had some action, it had some Force stuff. Each one was a little heavier in different plot lines, but most of them that featured Luke, Han, and Leia all had a little bit of everything. That's not where you're going to get from canon. It is much more directly focused. Shadow of the Sith is probably the most broad, but it is still mostly focused on the dark side and light side stuff. It's not necessarily political. So yeah, hopefully that helped you out. Anthony says, just wanted to say that your channel is an oasis from all the vitriol and fandom menace rhetoric that is out there on the internet. Well, we really appreciate that. That's what we're hoping to be, a place where you guys can come and talk with us, and you can even disagree with us, and we're still all friends and Star Wars fans here together. We're just wanting to talk about Star Wars in a way that makes everybody at least feel like they had their voice. And I always say the same thing. Just because we say we disagree with you, that's kind of the point of our channel, right? It's not we are happy that you guys send in your thoughts. It doesn't mean we're right and you guys are wrong. It just means we don't see it that same way. So we appreciate dissenting views, and we want you guys to argue with those. We don't really we don't take offense to that. That's kind of the basis of what our channel is built on. So we really appreciate your kind words and all your comments about this channel, and we're continuing to work hard to grow it even further.
Yeah, and I to add to that, right? I'm seeing a lot of comments right now about theory versus explain and all that situation. We've already kind of talked a little bit about that on our last live stream. We don't really want to get into it because we don't have a dog in the fight, and we have our opinions, but it's not really something that this channel is focused on. We're not focused on the drama. A lot of the drama is very biased from Twitter, from Theory making a lot of videos for sure, and from other people supporting Explained. We can just say that Explained is a great resource always for Star Wars stuff. You might not agree that he has like a very very positive opinion. Sometimes it does feel a little just straightforward, and not necessarily him and Molly kind of talking about it. But Theory, he had great lore videos in the past. I can't deny that stuff, and he has passion for sure. But that's not what this channel's for. Like Liam said, we're here to give nuance. That doesn't really sell well on YouTube, right? We like to have everyone's opinions in here, and then we'll give ours, and we may agree with each other, we may disagree with each other. We don't Me and Liam don't always agree, right? Like we have different opinions on Acolyte. I'm okay on it. He doesn't like it at all, and that's fine, right? But the point is, it is respectful. It is happy here. We can talk about that, and if you excuse us of, like, not liking the EU, well, that's not factually possible because right behind Liam is his entire hardcover collection of both canon and EU, right? And we talk about that, we're reviewing those books, both of them, right, whenever they come out, right? It's just not what we're interested in. We are fans from Star Wars before Disney and after Disney, right? We're gonna have critiques from our filmmaking backgrounds. That is just kinda how it is. For the people in the chat, I think let's keep that stuff away. We don't want that to keep dominating our streams. That's kind of been happening lately. I would give as a resource this great YouTube essayist. His name is Anthony, Gramuglia, I think that's his name is. Let me just check to be sure. Uh, yeah, Anthony Gramuglia, right? He did like a whole 2.5 hour live stream. So if you want like the full rundown breakdown, and he's done like a lot of theories on a lot of or like essays on a lot of YouTubers and YouTube drama and all that, go for him. That's someone who's focused on doing that sort of stuff and can give at least a detailed and fully rich perspective compared to explained or theory or people who support on each side and all that. We don't have a dog in the race. It's a little annoying, honestly, at this point, talking about it. Everyone's going to have an opinion about it, but we can't give you any facts because it is entirely opinionated. So go for someone who actually is breaking down whatever has been out there. And you might get a perspective that you might have not had about the other side, or maybe you realize it's just something that'll blow over in a month, then we can go back to talking Star Wars. So that's all we really want to say. We're kind of hands off on that. We already made our comments about it and just some details, but no, it's not the point of our live streams, guys. We appreciate that you guys are so in tune with the fandom and that you love our space, but let's keep it about our space and the questions that you have about Star Wars, about books, about the video games, the news, and stuff like that.
And then back to the comments, we got Critical Thinker again, who says, "What are you guys' favorite non-Star Wars comic books?" And this is a question I really love. Admittedly, though, I haven't been as big of a comic reader for superhero comics and the like in the last couple years. I have so many to catch up on, and I've been reading a lot of other things. I've been reading a lot more manga these last couple of years. I've been reading, more Star Wars books that we do for the show or rereads for the show. Um, so my comic books superhero fandom, which used to be one of my favorite things, I haven't read as much in the last few years, which I am bummed about, and I need to get back into that. I think Superman next year will really get me there because I'm a big DC guy. So all the classic DC stories are my favorites. Watchmen, The Dark Knight Returns, Long Halloween, Year One, Dark Victory, which I truly do love a lot, and I think that's underrated as well. All Star Superman, best Superman book. Um, I'm trying to think of some other ones that I really love. Alan Moore, anything he touches, and my favorite run. I do think my favorite run of all time is Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. I love horror, and that is just a perfect horror comic. It also is. It's perfectly Alan Moore. I think it's his best thing. Honestly, like it more than Watchmen, but it is so good. I love that book. Even at the end when they start to bring in a lot more Justice League elements. Justice League being my favorite superhero team. Big fan of Grant Morrison's Justice League. One of my favorite Justice League runs ever. And then Mark Waid picks it up very well. And I even read all the other stuff that were in it. That's not as good, but I really liked a lot of that stuff. Gosh, I could go on forever about DC. I mean, I've read almost everything Batman from the mid 70s, Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil, all the way to end of Tom King's run, and then I kind of fell off, and I need to get back into it. But I enjoyed the first part of Tom King's run, not necessarily as much the second part. I think he does good single stories about characters, but the overall arcs I found a little lacking. As for Marvel, I've mostly focused on X-Men and Spider-Man. Those have been my two favorites over the years. Spider-Man in particular has always been my favorite, ever since seeing Tobey Maguire's movie as a kid and just being obsessed with that Spider-Mania. I've really had a big love for Peter Parker and for Spider-Man. And yeah, for me, a lot of the Stan Lee stuff, I've read the whole Stan Lee run and a lot of the early stuff. I think when you get to about issue 30 on the If This Be My Destiny story, once that hits, that book is in real and full force, and pretty much everything you read from then on is either pretty good to amazing, excellent. Spider-Man No More. Um, so I already said Long Halloween and Dark Victory for Batman, but I love Jeff Loeb and I love Tim Sale's art, and I think their work on Spider-Man Blue was one of my favorite Spider-Man books. That one really is heartbreaking. I thought that was a really great book, so that's my favorite of the Colors series from them. And then yeah, Daredevil. I've read a lot of Daredevil. I've read all of Frank Miller's Daredevil. I've read all of Bendis's Daredevil. I've read uh I love Hickman's Fantastic Four. So yeah, those are just off the top of my head a lot of the ones I'm naming. I could be missing some of my favorites of all time. But yeah, those are some great ones from across Marvel and DC that I really do love.
Yeah, I'm definitely less of the comic guy. Probably the one who's actually ironically more up to date on Star Wars comics, but that's only
Yeah.
because Liam kind of does trade paperbacks, while I just like search for every single and keep up with that. So it's also very strange reading comics as singles versus trade paperbacks versus omnibus. There's such a different experience,
Hmm.
especially with like fandom and how they read arcs versus individual issues and stuff like that, right? Like I've never really felt that about Star Wars books and stuff, but I've really started picking up that comic book fans can have insanely crazy opinions on comics before like an actual arc is completed. Um, I think I told Liam this, but when we went for the May the 4th marathon, I accidentally stayed up like most of the night. So I only had like 3 or 4 hours of sleep. And that's because I ended up just reading all the Invincible comics and I just finished that
Yeah.
whole run. I really like it. Oh, there's some runs at the end there that I think should be expanded out for the TV animation, especially like the reboot arc. I think that could be something tremendous and really fun if it's fleshed out. A lot of the last like 20 issues, you're just kind of speeding through things, and I assume with some of the choices made in the TV show, they're gonna spend a little bit more time on that, kind of shrink more of like not necessarily the meandering in the middle, but the stuff that is just pure action, no story, could be condensed a little bit, and more of the story-driven stuff at the end could really be fleshed out. But that's a great like examination of superheroes in the early 2000s. It was so highly rated for a reason. People love that and what it said about comic book stories at that point. And I think it still holds up pretty well. I think it's probably one of the few superhero stories outside of DC and maybe earlier Marvel that is like open to the idea of romance with their superheroes and the emphasis on that. I feel like that's kind of been strained in some ways in more recent years from what I've seen of comics. Other than that, like I'm trying to get into like stuff like New Teen Titans and all that, just because I love the TV show and I know it is very different depiction wise for a lot of characters, and
Yeah.
that lineup is like strangely spread out between the '04 Titans and Young Justice. It's kind of just strangely pieced together in DC animation. Um, but yeah, I'm planning on reading a lot of those comics, and I remember when I was a kid, there was I don't know if it was like an anniversary Spider-Man or something, but for some reason I was able to just get like reprints of like the first like 10 issues of Spider-Man. I was just so hooked to them from the very first run. I was like, I wanted it to keep going, and then they just stopped coming in the mail. Like I used to like stay up, not stay up. I'd be like wake up Sunday, run to get the mail because it was like in the old newspapers in like a separate like sleeve that they're just giving it. And I was like, oh my god, I sad I got rid of them because I really enjoyed them. That's probably like the first time I ever properly read comic books, but yeah, no, I'm looking forward to diving into DC and Marvel. I have a lot of love for DC, but I think I do like a lot of the characters in Marvel just a little bit more, like X-Men and stuff like that. I think DC, once I start reading them, I'll probably like the duos and more of like the team ups compared to Marvel. And some of it's like individual runs, like Daredevil and all that, that are like just super vaunted, but aren't necessarily tied to other big superheroes of its era. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of what I got there.
Yeah, Invincible's a good one too. I was thinking about indie comics too, and the one that everybody loves. And it took me a while. I'm gonna be honest, it took me a while to get into it, but I finally sat down and binged Saga in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, and by the end, I was hooked. So, man, hopefully it comes back stronger than ever one day. Uh, but still waiting to find out what happens next. And then another run, I was like browsing over my shelf in the corner that has the DC stuff, and Jeff Johns Green Lantern. I love that run. That's one of my favorite runs. So yeah, definitely. And Critical Thinker says Alan Moore Swamp Thing is goated. Absolutely, it is my favorite comic book run. Like Batman's my favorite character, and I've read like every Batman thing since the end of the Bronze Age, and I still love that run the most. Like that is just so good. It's so good. I love that. And then yeah, O'Neill Adams, like that stuff is so underrated nowadays. I feel like because everybody starts with year one, right? They all start with Frank Miller, and year one is amazing. But as a big fan of Batman animated series, I love all the stuff with Ra's al Ghul. I love that stuff. Like I think the demon stuff is all really good. Son of the Demon too, which is not Adams, but right, O'Neill wrote that. Denny O'Neill wrote that. I'm pretty sure. Um, that's great stuff. So definitely all good stuff that you mentioned. Critical Thinker also says Jeff John's Green Lantern is their favorite one. And for a long running independent comics, I also love Invincible and The Walking Dead. And The Walking Dead also does start out great. I've never finished The Walking Dead, but when I started it, I was really into it for the first, probably what, 30, 40, 50 issues. And then I kind of fell off. I was part of that like hardcore Walking Dead fandom when the show was starting. I loved all the first like 4 seasons. I thought were really great. They had their highs and lows, but season 1 is still one of my favorite season 1s of any show ever. And I loved I loved a lot of what they did with that show. And then it started having slow down in the end of season 4, and was it season 5 I think that redeemed it. It picked it back up, and then season 6 might have been where it started to fall off. I never finished the show either, but Walking Dead is really good. I think the comic is at least a better paced than the show. And yeah, Claremont's Uncanny X-Men is goated. That's been one of the main things I've read as well. So yeah, definitely some great stuff out there. So we appreciate that comment. Thank you. And we're at an hour and 42 minutes here for the stream so far, and we've barely gotten through a lot of these comments. Maybe we'll push it for a little bit longer. We like to keep these under 2 hours, but since you guys are seemingly all still here and enjoying this conversation, we'll keep it going for a little bit longer. Appreciate all the comments. So thank you guys. Moving on to the next one. Let's see. We got Anthony who says, "Do you think Mara Jade in canon could be the daughter of Cal and Marin?" It's an interesting idea. The only thing I would throw against that is the fact that she would be basically barely old enough to be in the sequel trilogy. If she was the daughter of Cal and Marin, she would be, way too young for Luke, obviously. So no, I don't think that she could be. I wouldn't mind them having a kid and that kid being important. Like I've said in the past about raising New Jedi Order, like I would love there to be a lot of legacy characters that all come into the fold, and whether the daughter of this person or connected to that person or just the person themselves from across canon, I think it really should be that unifying bridge that brings everything across all the different random people we have scattered throughout the dark times and the rebellion era, bring it all together. And it should be a good unifying place for the Force and for the Jedi. So, but yeah, no, I don't think Mara could ever be their daughter. But I like the concept of them having a kid.
I guess you can kind of go adopted daughter route with Kata, Bode's daughter, right? So
Mhm.
maybe I don't know. I like the idea that Mara Jade, even if she doesn't have the same exact origin, that she's not connected or known to anybody else that we have, right? I think her story works better when she has a very twisted and messed up way of dealing with the Force, especially through Palpatine's machinations, how she's used as like a living weapon, um, like a unseen agent, and that's why so much of Heir to the Empire all the way to Dark Force Rising and Last Command works because it's like her unlearning and stopping herself from the Luke Skywalker that she's actually seeing with and interacting, and the premonitions, the hallucinations, the flashbacks that was implanted in her, and like the propaganda that was like forced upon her, right? And I think that is a great way to look at the character. Have someone who despises Luke, is like, you've killed everything I believed in and stood for, and then already is noticing that wasn't 100% true, but then once you meet the real person and there's like the source of all your frustration and change in your life, and then you find out they're just a genuinely good person, right? It's like, oh, damn, okay, well, I can't help but like, at least be friendly with you and slowly grow to admire you. And that's why their romance and relationship is so good in the EU when they're actually featured in the same stories. When they're separate, I do feel like Mara is wasted. Like, she should have been around during Jedi Academy, but then you kind of only make that work because you're like, oh, she's gonna have a purple lightsaber instead of the blue that one Luke gives her, and she's saving Kyle Katarn, who is kind of with the Jedi Academy, kind of not. It's weird how they use her, and then she's like randomly doing smuggling stuff. She's with Lando randomly at one point. You know, it's it's a character that I think if you take the best beats of her from the start and you lay that out, and then you take the best beats that continue afterwards and kind of squeeze the stuff that kind of just has her just doing random stuff to a little bit more of like a 1 or 2 year period before she fully commits to like being around Luke and all that, then I think she works way better in canon. I think that's where canon has the opportunity to really shape Luke and maybe see him take these chances, take these important steps forward, and with attachments, with how the Jedi will function. And then if she is killed, or if Snoke is behind the killing, maybe, or if Ben is inadvertently part of the reason why she's no longer around Luke, or like she dies or something, yeah, I can see that definitely making an impact on the academy and
Mhm.
on Luke and all that, and still be justified. And to Liam's point about like, you want Rey's new Jedi Order to be unifying with all of these legacy and all that, I do too. But then there's that question of like, okay, then why weren't they under Luke, right? Why wasn't that? And I think you have to be really smart and nuanced about why Luke doesn't get some people, right? It's philosophy of difference between Jedi Order versus just being Jedi, like Boken Jedi. Is he actually telling people, I think you guys should just do your own thing and live your peaceful life because of all the struggle that you've had? Maybe I'll protect you from afar. It's probably better if we don't just coalesce everybody who already has decades and history fighting against the Empire and stuff like that. You need to make it so that it's not just Rey just doing the Luke's Jedi Academy. And I mean, arguably, you can lean on the whole point of Jedi Academy trilogy where it's not a really good start for him. It's pretty inauspicious. He loses Gantoris, right? Dorsk 81 to Dorsk 82, right? Kip Turon. I liked him as a kid, but man, that is such a problematic character. New Jedi Order does a lot with him, but it's hard to really justify him, and when it's so much easier to justify Luke destroying the Death Star versus what Kip is doing, right? You're trying to make that parallel. So I want to see Luke have those struggles in the same way, but I also want to see obviously some successes, right? So how do you balance that, and how do you get to Rey's version of that, and what's going to be different, what's going to be the same, what she can pick up from Luke, what she needs to take away and be different from Luke? Yeah, that's going to be a really interesting puzzle. I honestly think the safest thing to do is to make these movies with Ray and TV shows or whatever, but then do a Mark Hamill animated TV show of his Jedi Academy at the same time, so people can be like, "Oh, like it's kind of contrasting, it's kind of comparing this connection between here and there. What are things that are lost and being pieced together by Ray? What is Luke not trying to have Ray repeat, right?" I think that'd be a great way to elevate both of these characters, but still show that they are different.
Anthony says, cool question. Could Or should a Jedi use Force lightning? Well, depends which source you look at. And technically, Force lightning a Jedi doesn't use. Now, there are other powers that are basically Force lightning that characters in Legends did use, especially Luke. Um, but I don't think a Jedi should. I mean, I like the vision of, and it's very like video game esque division, but I like the vision of dark side versus light side powers. The light being able to influence minds and thoughts and all that type of stuff more easily, and the dark side being able to manipulate through power. I like that the dark side has force choke and force lightning and these more aggressive tactics. I think that's a cooler idea. Uh, but we have seen it, and I do actually kind of like Yoda can catch force lightning and return it. Like I would imagine Yoda knows how to use force lightning. He just doesn't do it. Like I think it's very acceptable and cool for like Grandmaster Luke or Yoda or some of these ultra powerful force users to be able to know how to use a power and still hold back from using it because of the temptations of where they have to go mentally to use that power. But no, I don't think we should see like Jedi starting to actively use them in like the Rey movie, for example, or even going back to like an old Republic time. Maybe only in Dawn of the Jedi if they're doing like the Jedi, then I think maybe you could do that because there's no. It's all about balance. It's not about light or dark.
Yeah, I mean, that I don't like electric judgment. It's really only used in the Storm War, and it's a very silly way of like kind of working around Force Lightning by kind of making it like yellow too and stuff like, oh, it's like he's really using it to probe people. Like, no, it's still lightning, man. It's still gonna shock you and be painful. And I also don't like the idea of Luke, the one who is tortured in front of his father's eyes with Force Lightning kind of reusing it and repurposing it. Like, you can say, like, "Oh, he's turning it around and making it better," but I don't know. I also just think the naming is just, like, a silly way of, like and a problem of, like, a lot of stuff starting post New Jedi Order of, like, power scaling, concepts of the Force kinda being wishy-washy and not, like, really sticking with something for a period of time, right? New Jedi Order was really dealing with, like, a lot of the repercussions of Bandom Era being so hodgepodge, and then it really delivered on so many great concepts and ideas of, like, how is the Jedi Order organized? How is the galaxy gonna be shaped by this conflict and all that? So I'm more into Legacy of the Force. I don't think they really handle power scaling really well. People kinda go crazy and do insane things. I think Fate of the Jedi is a little bit better, but at that point, it's more because of, like, you're catching up with Jason and some of the more stranger force powers that he's using, which I think is what it should have been next, honestly, instead of Fallout, in my opinion. But I do say that I like the idea of using Force Lightning and stuff like that for, like, Imperial Knights who are tempted, who have these darkness, but are under, like, a benevolent empire, which, you can argue is that a good or bad thing under Fel Empire and all that, but it makes more sense there, and also the Jedi, like, Liam was saying, just not when we're dealing with, like, the concept of the Jedi and trying to fundamentally say, like, "This is how an order is, this is how a Padawan and a master is," and I appreciate canon for really pointing out that the dark side is cancerous. It's like once you get a little taste of it, it's like an addiction. It's gonna burn you out from the inside out, right? It's not necessarily something that you can just juggle and flip a switch on. Like, if Luke couldn't really do it and, the other authors try to make him seem like he does, right? If you couldn't really deal with the consequences of Dark Empire and Jedi Academy, I don't see canon doing much better, and I don't want canon to ever venture that path.
Well, I think this is going to be have to be the last one here as we wrap up. And Anthony says, "What do you think of my idea of a new Sith triumvirate around Vitiate, Sidious, and Crate?" Well, you definitely named probably the three most powerful Sith ever. I think it's a cool idea to have them, but it's in a way, it is like a what if scenario, really,
Yeah.
because they can't exist really in the same time period because, well, first of all, Vitiate's, 2000 plus years before Sidious and Crate, and then Sidious and Crate do exist at the same time, but Crate's not a Sith for a lot of that. So Yeah, but it's cool. I mean, it would be cool. It'd be really cool art. It would be really cool to see in like a Star Wars What If. But and I don't think anybody could beat them, honestly. Like nobody could take them down. Doesn't matter. You have Grandmaster Luke and Obi-Wan and Anakin all teaming. I don't think anybody could really beat Vitiate, Sidious, and Crate. But yeah, cool idea. Not practical for the actual storytelling.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the only other triumvirate we've really had is the KOTOR 2 triumvirate, and that why that kinda works for me is that they're not necessarily better than each other. They've all got flaws, they all kinda cover for each other a bit. They're all very different perspectives of the dark side. Um, I don't think a nihilist and a Kreia sit together and have a lovely tea and all that. They're just very different. But I could see a Vitiate and a Sidious having a lot of similarities. Arguably, Vitiate is just Old Republic Sidious, right? And he
Yeah.
just transports himself across body, space, and time. So that argument of like, does Sidious have that capability? Are we gonna just ignore him as the original Star Wars? Big baddie and say Vitiate is way more powerful. I don't know, right? And there would be a power struggle with the story that Vitiate has and the insane power levels of the Old Republic. I think he would edge out Sidious to some degree, but Sidious is probably a way better planner, someone who's always, like, playing the game a bit more politically and all that. And again, that is kinda why it's hard. Like, Vitiate is like an old Sith, drained his own planet and, existed and built up his forces over a millennia. Insidious is someone who's like maybe 50, 60 when he starts getting trained and starts playing politics and then takes over and starts, disconnecting the building blocks of the prequel era, pre-prequel era, Old Republic, which is already showing flaws, right? That's why the Empire is so successful. It's not because he was powerful and took over. It's because he kind of twisted all the weaknesses on each other, and the only people who could have stopped him were the Jedi, and they already were twisted and messed up by the Sith with their machinations from Bane onwards. Um, but also, as like a final comment, there's Vitiate, there's Sidious, and then way below is Crate. I don't see Crate in the same power scaling. He has a nice order and all that, but like a lot of Star Wars legacy is about him being weakened and dying of old age. It really takes until Legacy War to really get him to some power level. Um, I don't necessarily say Kate Skywalker is stronger than any of the Skywalkers we've seen in books and, animation and live action that are closer to the original trilogy, maybe fairly close, but again, power scaling by the time of late EU is just so insane that I guess you can make Crate near Sidious, but honestly, I wouldn't put him in the same room. He'd be like the cool enforcer type of the 3, but I feel like the other 2 would bully him all the time.
Well, that's going to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. So thank you so much for watching. We went a little longer. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed all the Q&A part. Come back next week. We'll be back again next Tuesday around 7:30ish Pacific time. And hopefully, you're enjoying these live streams as we get to really talk to you guys a lot more. Now that there's not as much news, this week was really absent from news. But hopefully, you guys enjoyed the whole stream. Keep an eye out for more content on the channel. We posted a lot lately between our Let's Play walkthroughs, and then we just did the video game tier list, and we did the Legends Timeline Part 5. So keep an eye out for a lot more content coming on the channel. We have a lot of good stuff coming for you all. Make sure you subscribe if you're new. Join us every single week. Like the video if you haven't. Thank you so much for watching this week, everybody, and we will see you all next week. Good night.